not met because, let's face it, Congress is not in session very long to do anything, for crying out loud. Half the time they're not even around. But
and when they are in session, they're doing stupid stuff, like congressional hearings for HHS and claiming that they can't get documents when, what's the whole point of having a hearing if you can't do anything?
Yes, exactly. Well, KrisAnne, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll come on back. And then I think John has a question for you. So, folks, thanks for being here on the Conservative Syndicate. We'll be right back after we pay some bills with KrisAnne Hall.
Today on Moments of Madness. With the recent signing into law of Indiana Senate Bill 101, legislatively known as the Senate Enrolled Act, National Journal writer Ronald Bernstein best summed up the left's latest desperate attempt to ensure Obama's third term by proxy in 2016. The objective behind his summation is the left's need to retain at least a pen and a phone in the White House that can continue to circumvent the separation of powers should they not recapture Congress through fundraising, vote pandering, redistricting, and fraud. Brownstein pens, with the Indiana religious freedom law, Pence detonated what could be the biggest landmine facing his party in 2016, the sense that the GOP wants to reverse the cultural and demographic changes relentlessly remaking America. Brownstein reiterates, as only a media parrot can, that once again right-wing extremist factions, otherwise known as Christian conservatives, has succeeded in deviously enlisting yet another tepid establishment Republican in their quest to reinitiate the days of the Inquisition in order to thwart our first half-white president's bid to finish fundamentally transforming the United States of America. Using a 22-year-old federal law initially written by Democrat Senator Chuck Schumer and signed into law by Bill Clinton that was later diluted by the Supreme Court ruling in 1997 as an overreach into state sovereignty, several states have passed their own versions of the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, which decrees people have a civil right to refuse to participate in activities that go against their own religious beliefs. Indiana has been the latest of 22 states to do this. Utilizing the race card as a premise from which the civil rights movement has been redefined to include anything anyone can dream up as a right, the left has introduced the war on women, which demands the right to murder unborn children and receive free birth control, all on the taxpayer dime, and the war on economic injustice, in which the wealth disparity theme has been embraced under Obama's creative destruction agenda, also known as wealth redistribution or Keynesian economic, and expanded and repackaged as new and improved by proclaiming opportunity and entitlement means the same thing. This has not been enough to once and for all bring about the left's vision of a utopian collective. The war on Christianity is the left's last leg of its progressive platform. It is a campaign designed to further redefine and rewrite American heritage and history by assigning Christian influence in government as the primary reason we are a nation of greedy, oppressing haters rather than generous, compassionate liberators. Forcing private sector enterprises to not only tolerate but condone and accept silently the immoral onslaught orchestrated by the left and subjected upon society by the homosexual activist community, we are now seeing the signs of political genocide equivalent to the early days of the Holocaust in Germany. Businesses are being marked for protests and boycotted, while their owners and CEOs are being tried and politically ostracized in the mock court of public opinion by ideological vigilantes. There is much more to the DNC's dislike of Israel than just its appeasement of Islam or its sympathy towards Palestine. Traditional Christianity stands in the way as to how a remade America should look, and it needs to be either redefined or removed. Barack Obama himself hides behind a newly fabricated shield of pseudo-Christianity, one that equates wealth redistribution and immoral tolerance as the essential elements of the gospel proclaimed by a black Jesus, while the rest of the world proclaims rainbows or validation that God is gay. Well, let us not forget another man who used this same facade as a means to an end. Hitler touted himself a Christian in the early days of his campaign. He, too, later perverted his doctrine to fit his ideological belief Jews were a problem that needed a final solution. Such it is today in regard to Christianity. Christianity remains the last barrier to tyrannical rule. It is the last reminder of moral conscience. It is the last voice that can warn of pending destruction and exile into the wilderness of enslavement. In the minds of the godless, Christianity must be eradicated in the same way Judaism was in Germany. Unfortunately, the church, for whatever reason, has spent too much time huddled within its own walls, believing if it just leaves the godless alone, they will leave it alone. Well, that isn't going to happen. It is time Christians acknowledge this. It is time to proclaim our own jihad, our own holy war in the name of Christian injustice. After all, if God is really for us, who can stand against us? What weapon formed against us can prosper? Of course, this means picking up the most effective weapon we have and wielding it. That weapon is our vote. It is time. What God has put together, let no man tear asunder. This is John Matthews for Moments of Madness. Okay, hey, this is John Matthews. We're back right here on the Conservative Syndicate. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us tonight and understand or just want to remind you, I guess, that you can pick up the archive of this show in about an hour and a half. Go to our website, theconservativesyndicate.net, and you can pick it up along with any of our other shows and re-listen to it if you want to, share it, whatever you want to do with it. That's what it's there for. We have with us KrisAnne Hall, who goes around the country here doing what she does best, and that's teaching the Constitution to students at both levels. And Chris, I had a question you had mentioned earlier before the break here about how Congress has basically just chosen not to do anything. They basically have just decided that for whatever reason, whether it's political preservation or whatever, not to exert any real authority. They do rattle their sabers a lot. They do talk a lot, but don't really. There's nothing behind it. And I am of the belief, and I just want to get your opinion on this. It seems to me what we have here, when you talk about the executive branch, about how Congress is supposed to be overseeing the executive branch, and what I've seen happen is because Congress is not doing anything. What we have is an executive branch that basically is decreeing to the courts what needs to be done, and the courts are just basically rubber stamping everything that the president does or any leftist movement out there per se. The homosexual agenda is the latest and probably in some ways the most perfect example, is that the president evolves on an issue, comes out and says something, and next thing you know, there's lawsuits flying all over the place, and it ends up in the hands of the Supreme Court, and they just seem to rubber stamp everything. That seems to be a gross miscarriage of separation of powers, in my opinion.
Well, it absolutely is, but it's nothing new. The history of the 700 years of the creation of our Constitution is replete with those examples, and our framers knew that one of the most common designs of oppressive government, one of the very first tools and mechanisms that they use is the corruption of the court system, because courts are always indebted to their executive branches because the executive branch appoints the judges. Yeah, why would we be surprised?
Do you think that maybe that's the one, if we have a flaw in the system, is the fact that judges are appointed rather than elected?
No, I don't think so. Because if you understand the real supervision and the real separation of powers that was supposed to be in place, number one, the federal courts that have spread throughout our states are not constitutionally supported. They are engaging in activity way outside of the Constitution and meddling in state affairs they were never delegated a power to meddle in. And not only that, we have this idea that we have three co-equal branches of government. We were never supposed to have three co-equal branches of government. They each had their own power, and their powers were equally belonging to them, meaning nobody could take it away from them, but their powers were not equal. The House has more power than the Senate because they hold Article 1, Section 7, power of the purse. The Congress as a whole has more power than the president because the only power the president was delegated was not to be the leader of a country, but to be the leader of the military in times of war and to be a representative on behalf of the states to foreign treaties, which neither can take place without the consent of the House or the Senate or both. And the judicial branch was delegated the least amount of power, and we have totally flipped that on its head because, once again, we have a Congress who has abdicated its power for political convenience and won't defund and won't take into account the power of the purse which our framers believed was the most important check and balance on government. All this, we had that big crisis over defunding executive amnesty and the threat of, national security, when the bottom line is that if our conservative majority in the House wanted to defund executive amnesty, they should do that. We don't need the Senate's approval. No bill, no budget has to have Senate approval. According to the Constitution, under Article 1, Section 7, the House alone is in charge of the finances. The Senate may propose amendments, but if they don't, and they don't offer up any amendments whatsoever, then the budget that the House creates is the budget. It's not subject to the same rigor of law because a budget is not law. A budget expires every year, and that's why the House put it in there. James Madison said, "We gave the power of the purse to the House alone because the House are the direct representatives of the people and are best suited to redress our grievances. And the power of the purse is the most effective tool to do that."
Wow. I've gotten such an education already just listening to you in the short time that we've had you. I want to ask one more question here. I'll get it back over to Joe here. I didn't really mean to interrupt, but
that's okay.
You've really got my what do you want to call it? My knowledge, let's call it my tinfoil hat, okay? Because that's what the left likes to say, but it's activated.
Yeah.
Okay. About the fact that we have this topsy-turvy situation now where the courts seem to have all the power and the Congress just sits around, does nothing, and then the president just decrees what he wants done. I'd like to ask you, how many of the issues that we've seen come before the Supreme Court in the last 10, 20 years are actually constitutionally supposed to be in front of the Supreme Court? I thought the idea of the Supreme Court was to deal with issues when state law conflicted with federal law. One tried to override the other, but it seems like anything and everything can go before the Supreme Court these days.
Well, it's really hard to answer that question because we're not really aware of all the cases that go before the Supreme Court. I mean, we can be aware, but we're simply not aware. Mm-hmm. I would say that 99.9% of the cases that get the real media attention, 99.9% of those are not under the proper constitutional jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And what we need to understand is that the Supreme Court was never delegated a jurisdiction to determine what the limits of federal government power. So the whole idea that the Supreme Court could determine whether health care is a power wielded by the federal government or not is an unconstitutional authority, because the Supreme Court is part of the federal government. And our framers thought it absurd that the federal government, regardless of which department it may be, would be able to expand or sanction a power that was not delegated through the Constitution.
Wow. Yeah, you just answered probably to me. That's like the $64 question. Why are we finding ourselves at this place where the courts are basically judge, jury, and executioner? I mean, everything they say. Well,
because in 1803, the Supreme Court issued an opinion called Marbury versus Madison, where they declared themselves the ultimate rulers of the universe, and then just expanded upon that through precedent. I mean, if you had the power to determine yourself the ruler of the world, and then, pass on that power to those who were just like you, who would ever give that power up? And that's exactly what the courts have done. And then the politicians have seized that power from the courts by making the courts their political tools. But the thing is, it's crazy because it's the exact same thing that's happened over hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not anything that should be new to us, which is, I don't mean to sound like I'm doing a gratuitous plug of my book here, but this is why I wrote the book, my book, Sovereign Duty, because our framers anticipated this day. They anticipated the day when the federal government would look exactly like it is. And they designed the solutions within the constitutional republic so that we wouldn't have to go to war. We wouldn't have to pick up swords. We could actually take back our constitutional republic without violence. And my Sovereign Duty book gives that plan that the framers put in place. It's right there in front of our faces, but the problem is we failed to teach the Constitution and failed to teach the proper role of government for decades. We don't even know it's there.
Wow. I'm just,
I'm sitting, my head is just, I'm doing a bobblehead right now.